now we don't really
You
want.
know the weather.
There's trees down that are changing the waterways and well, that's not only, but it's
It's not a lot of work to do it.
I know
it's a matter of keeping up with it. Years ago, the old contractors used to do it for
Everything
the
came in
towns.
public.
We'll
I had left.
call a regular meeting of the Bureau of Public Works, August 21st, 4 p.m. Ask the clerk, please read the roll. Be sure we have a quorum. We believe we do.
Avedisian.
Here.
Lozano.
Here.
Bush. Curry. DeBella.
Here.
Drake.
Here.
Gale. Here. Gentile.
Here.
Healy. Hoffman.
Here.
Holloway. Johnson. Lester.
Here.
Magnan. Patel.
Here.
Salemi.
Here.
Stuber. Taylor.
Here.
Torres. Wolf. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Item number 2, public comments relative to agenda items. Public comments relative to agenda items. Hearing none, moving on. Item 3, approval of the previous meeting's minutes.
Move adoption.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions? I'm sorry. None. Thank you. Minutes passed. Item number 4. I believe we're going to have a presentation at this point by CDM Smith and I guess some staff, including Scott. Would you like to go?
Yeah, I think we're just gonna jump right into it. This report is an anticipated report. We've been talking about this for a long time. The MDC is in the middle of doing the revised integrated plan in North Hartford, as everybody remembers. We agreed in May of 2023 to go from $47 million a year up to $170 million a year and create a community benefit. The original work in North Hartford was only to basically separate the street catch basins from the sewer system, but not do any internal plumbing and separation of the homes. And after the major storm, August of 2021, there's a lot of pushback from EPA and from the state. We proposed to do full separation on all of the streets, which would remove the storm from the home at the source and the businesses. And this study is to identify, once we do that, we need to separate the storm from the properties, from the streets, and we need a place to dump the stormwater. There's been a huge, and that would be the North Branch of the Park River. There's also been a huge concern over what's causing all the localized flooding in Hartford, and our position has been that the river itself needs to be dredged independent of MDC's work. So this study was done in conjunction with the City of Hartford and the MDC. We spent about $900,000. Both paid 50%. We got 50% grant, so it cost the MDC and the city about $250 roughly. And this study is going to show you the results of what's causing the flooding in this localized area of Hartford and what we need to do to move forward. Not only for the city's flooding issue, but also for the MDC's sewer separation project. So Joe La Liberty from CDM.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jellison. Is this on? You guys can hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm Joe La Liberty with CDM Smith. Here with me today is Nicole Derelou and Emily McCarron, both also with CDM Smith as part of the project team for this effort. I'm going to go over the overview of the scope, some of which Scott, Mr. Jellison just gave, but I'll go through that. Then I'm going to turn it over to Emily McCarron, who's going to look at the flooding, basically what's, happening out there today, kind of go through, what has happened with this area over the last, 50, 100 years regarding development, where the 100-year floodplain is, and where the flooding concerns are. She's then going to turn it over to Nicole Derelou, who's going to look at the field investigations and findings of what we did along the North Branch of the Park River and some of its tributaries. She'll then turn it back over to Emily McCarron to look at the sewer separation considerations, as Mr. Jellison mentioned, because this same area needs a complete separation as part of the integrated plan in order to meet the long-term control plan, the consent order, to eliminate CSOs. And then we'll wrap it up just with a next step slide. So a little overview. We're talking about the yellow area up here on the slide here. It's northwestern Hartford area. It's referred to at times as the North Branch Park River area, which is the river that runs through it, and basically all of the land slopes down to there. It also at times is referred to as the Granby Street area, which is one of the main collector roads that runs just east of the North Branch Park River area. That's the area when we say we're going to separate the Granby Street area. Sometimes you'll hear that. And it's also referred to as the Blue Hills area, which is a community name for that area, roughly in the northern portion of that yellow area. For the most part tonight, I think we're going to refer to it as the North Branch of the Park River area, but just want to let you know that it's all kind of the same general area of what we're talking about. And as Mr. Jellison mentioned, basically the City of Hartford and the Hartford MDC did a joint study for this area. It was funded by 55% grant from Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and then the remaining 45% of the study was split halfway between the City of Hartford and the Hartford MDC. And basically it has two components, which is why it was split. The first component is to evaluate the North Branch of the Park River, which was done for the city. I'll go into that in a little bit on the next slide. And the second portion was the sewer separation, which is the Hartford MDC's portion of the study. So breaking those down a little further, the North Branch of the Park River, we looked at a lot of past reports and flooding complaints and whatnot for the area. We did a detailed walk of the North Branch Park River, basically from the Park River conduit entrance, which is at Farmington Avenue, all the way up to the U-Hart Bridge, which is located in the northern portion of Hartford in the study area. And we were looking to document existing conditions and identify any deficiencies along that stretch. We also collected sediment samples from an environmental and a geotechnical standpoint. If there was sediment that needed to be removed, we wanted to know if we would be able to reuse it. And if it needed to be taken off-site, we wanted to know, for estimating cost associated with that, we wanted to understand, was there any contaminated material in there, and exactly, where would it need to go if it needed to be removed. And then we are to develop a memorandum to document the existing conditions and make recommendations. I know that memorandum is wanted by all and many. I am happy to report that I did review a draft of it. It is getting finalized, and it will be submitted next week. I will review a final version of it early next week, and we plan to make that submission next week. So separately, the Hartford MDC's portion is the sewer separation. We did television inspection inside of some existing drain lines and did some flow meters in some existing drain lines. We wanted to see what the condition was of these drain lines, as potentially to send some of this additional flow in order to build the new drains to separate the area. And also, the meters were to see how much flow is currently in these drains and how much more flow could they take from the area, and whether or not we needed to build new outfalls or we could use existing drainage infrastructure. All of that went into a hydraulic model that we already have, but we basically continue to update it, that is used to determine exactly how we will separate this area. And ultimately, what we owe by the end of the year is to develop plans and profiles of the proposed drains, including outfalls, from that Granby area, the North Branch area, in order to completely eliminate the CSOs from the North Branch of the Park River. So why are we doing this? There's been several large storms over the last several years. Probably you are familiar with some of these pictures. I know the top right one was one that made the national news a few years back at Cornwall at Granby Street is where that is, in Marcus Garvey Park. That's the one where there was several feet of water there and with some rescues that were needed. Bottom right is the U-Heart campus. And bottom left picture is a home on Granby Street where you're looking in the backyard. The railroad track is in the back, and it's flooding that occurs behind the home. Emily's going to dig into these all a little bit more, but why are we here is, that there's an outcry from the community about the flooding issues. It impacts the residents, schools, businesses, and whatnot, and so that's the city's portion there. But also, the MDC's long-term control plan, as I have mentioned, requires complete elimination of the combined sewer overflows to the north branch of the Park River. So we also need to develop an alternative in order to do that. The current alternative that we're proceeding with is for separation, building a new drain that will take the stormwater out of the combined sewer system and bring it to the north branch of the Park River. So just a quick highlight before I turn it over to Emily of what is causing, the flooding in this area. And Emily's going to give you some details of all of these things in a little bit. But just to give you the highlight before I turn it to her, there's been a lot of development over the year that actually has occurred within the floodplain. So there's people who are complaining about flooding. Well, their property that was built actually was done within the floodplain, so it's expected to flood. And there's nothing you can do unless you were to move that property and move them to somewhere else. It will flood whenever there is a big storm. There also is a railroad swale that you're going to hear about. There's basically a railroad that runs to the west of Granby Street. The railroad is higher than the street. So basically water that comes up, not even from the road on Granby Street, it's water from all the private properties needs to get through this railroad, and there's culverts through the railroad, and because the water can't get there, there's nowhere for it to go but to flood. It has nothing to do, that flooding has nothing to do with the Hartford MDC's sewer system. It has to do with the fact that there is a railroad that is basically in the way where water can't get through from the back of these yards unless there was a way for the water to get under the railroad in a better manner. Maintenance issues, basically Emily's going to walk through all of these, but I'm going to walk from the downstream up. Basically, you have all of the stormwater goes to the north branch of the Park River, so we wanted to look at, the down trees, the sediment, the blockages along the river, the culverts, the street, the bridges that cross over the random, the streets, Albany Avenue, all of those streets, that have culverts. We wanted to look at all that and make sure that it was maintained properly. Then you have like the collectors that go into the river. The unnamed stream is one that you're going to hear about. Emily will give you more detail of where that location is, but basically those are like streams that go from the area to the north branch of the Park River. And then you have the streets themselves, which clearly you need, properly functioning catch basins in order for the water to make it into the catch basin. If a catch basin cover is clogged, then you're going to have flooding. If the catch basin cover can allow the stormwater to come in, then it would get in, and that's the importance of street sweeping. So basically, you need all of these things. You need the water from the street to be able to get into the basin. You need the basin to then be able to be conveyed to the stream, and then you need the river itself in order to be able to convey it. So all of these things matter to be properly maintained to reduce flooding. There's also some undersized culverts that would need to be upsized, and then, of course, there's a lack of storm drain system just by the very fact that the sewer system in the area, the combined sewer system, is the only pipe. That means that there's a lack of a storm drain system, which is why we're doing separation to build a new drain, and which we can take it to the north branch. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Emily. Dive a little bit more into the flood.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Joe, I have a question for
Commissioner
you.
Curry.
Thank you, Commissioner Curry. Could we go back to the slide that shows the 3 picks? Yes. Now, I've seen this presentation numerous times, but for the first time, when you say MDC's long-term control plan, anyone that's seeing this for the first time or does not know that it's not MDC's fault, if you want to use that word, this slide almost implies that MDC is responsible for those 3 picks. Just a comment on my part.
It was not intended to...
Oh, I know that.
No. Why are we doing this has 2 reasons. One is because of the flooding, which is what the pictures are, but also the Hartford MDC needs to do complete separation of that area as part of their long-term control plan. I was not trying to tie the last bullet of the MDC.
I get it.
So, okay, thank you.
All right. right, well, thank you, Joe. I'm going to dig into the items that Joe gave you the overview on. So we'll start here. Here's a map of the city of Hartford, and we're in Northwest Hartford. And what we want to highlight on this map is that there are no flood control measures as part of the Greater Hartford Flood Commission system in this area. So our project area is upstream of the Park River conduit, and the north branch of the Park River is a natural stream in this area. In reviewing reports, we did find that in 1959, the Greater Hartford Flood Commission was warned that development in this area would contribute to flooding and potential loss of property. So this is a historic problem. We're kind of making the note that as we developed the area upstream of the north branch of the Park River, it did cause increased flooding. And now, dig into the details. You have some handouts on these as well. We're going to look at the north branch of the Park River area in two sections. So this is what we're calling south of Albany Ave. So this map is showing the area from Farmington Ave up to Albany Ave, and the river is in between those two roads. So the picture on the left shows locations where both the city of Hartford and the MDC have received reports of flooding. And the map to the right is the FEMA floodplain map, showing that the striped area is the floodway for the north branch of the Park River. The turquoise color is the 100-year flood, and the orange area is the 500-year flood area. This area frequently has reports of flooding on Scarborough Street, the Woodland Drive area near the public housing, and parking lots behind Woodland Street. Here's an aerial photo of the same area from 1934, and here we see that there were already houses along Scarborough Street. On Woodland Drive area, there was no development, there was no public housing. On Woodland Street, there was development, but there was no buildings in the parking areas along the river. And this picture predates the Park River conduit, which was built in the 1940s. Now we're going to look at the northern area. So we're looking from Albany Ave up to the Bloomfield line. So similar maps. We're on the left. This is where the city and the MDC are receiving reports of flooding. And on the right, it's the FEMA floodplain showing the striped area is the river floodway. And the 100-year flood is in turquoise, and the 500-year flood is in orange. Oh, so can you not hear me? Okay, thank you. All right. In this area, there are frequently reported flooding on Mark Twain Drive, at Weaver High School, at the area of the inlet to the Granby Street conduit, which is near the intersection of Nahum Drive, Burnham Street, and Granby Street, University of Hartford, Granby Street, Cornwall Street, Lime Street, and Palm Street. So this photo from 1934 is again of the same area, but this one kind of tells us a little bit more about development. So in 1934, the unnamed stream that we're going to talk about, which eventually became the 108-inch Granby Street conduit, was still a natural channel. You kind of see it up and in the middle. It's under where the red outline for the Weaver High School is. So those were natural channels that were later put into a conduit. There was no development along Mark Twain Drive. It didn't exist. So that came later along with all the housing developments and schools. There was no University of Hartford, and although there was Granby Street, there was no houses along Granby Street. What there was the railroad tracks, and there was the berm that pre-existed the other development. So these are features we're going to talk about as we go along. And here, again, the northern area, just to compare 1934 to 2010, just more impervious cover, more stormwater runoff, less infiltration, less evapotranspiration. As areas develop, it just contributes to higher runoff, more flooding, and water quality issues. With the MS4 program, they get into the directly connected impervious area, and this is what they're talking about here. All right, so now we're going to focus on flooding that's directly adjacent to the north branch of the Park River. So, as mentioned, two locations that are commonly reported as issues is flooding at the Woodland Drive apartments and flooding at the Woodland Street parking lot. So both of these fall into the floodplain. So these are issues related to being right along the river. They're not related as much to infrastructure. The next location is Scarborough Street. So the north branch of the Park River floods into the backyards, and there are buildings that are in the 500-year floodplain, and there are yard features such as pools, tennis courts that are within the 100-year floodplain. And circled on the map is 150 Scarborough Street because we had reports with photos of flooding at that property. So here are those photos. So back in March, the owner sent in photos to get an idea of the issues at their property. So here, the river floods into their yard. The owners are concerned about loss of 5 to 10 feet of bank along the edge of their property. And an important issue to note here that the City of Hartford has mentioned to us at our meetings with the Hartford Flood Commission is that in this area, the private property owners actually own the land under the river. So there's a lot of issues in these areas. So there's challenges with how to maintain if the city has requirements, as well as what role the private properties would play. And as part of our evaluation, we're looking to do improvements to the river to see if we can reduce flooding in the area, and we think we could get up to a 2-foot reduction in flood height, which could have less frequent flooding and less often flooding, but there'll still be flooding. These people are built right along the river, and during high flows, it's going to get onto their property. The next location is Mark Twain Drive, and as we showed originally back in 1934, there was no Mark Twain Drive, so as they've built along the floodplain. But there's still opportunities to improve things if improvements were made to the stream as well as the Mark Twain Drive culvert. We do think you can see improvements. I have a slide on that. So here's the Mark Twain Drive culvert. When we did a site inspection this June, there was debris blocking the opening, and it appeared potentially undersized. So that's something that should be evaluated if a larger opening would improve conditions. So on the side, that shows the location. And this is, we'll talk about unnamed streams. This does convey the unnamed stream to the north branch of the Park River. Another location, University of Hartford. So they have low-lying parking lots along the river that are known to have flooding. There's a photo that we got from the internet, as well as the policy for their public safety is that you park at your own risk. They're letting people know that if you park there and your car gets flooded, it's your responsibility. All right, now we're going to focus on the flooding between the railroad tracks and Granby Street. So here in the background of this photo, you can see the railroad tracks are above the person's yard, and the yard has filled with water and the shed's floating. So as we've discussed, the railroad tracks were built before the homes on Granby Street, and it appears that the depressed area between the house and the railroad does not have proper drainage. The people in the news report said that they've always had this problem, so it's likely, that they've all, since the time they built the properties, they've experienced flooding. Here's another picture, 217 Granby Street. Again, railroad, berm, flooded backyard, and the property. From our SWIM model, we have a cross-section to kind of relate how the profile of the river versus the railroad versus Granby Street works. So on the west side of the profile, on the west side of the river, it's higher. The north branch of the Park River, you see the river bed. Then you see to the right, Mark Twain Drive is a little blip up, kind of flattened, and then it goes up to the railroad peaks high. And then the profile goes down where the backyards are below the railroad and Granby Street. So it's that dip that goes below the FEMA 100-year floodplain that's collecting water during storms. We were asked to look at 81 Granby Street because they've had an issue there. It's near the intersection with Cornwall and Granby Street near the Marcus Garvey Park. I'm not going to read all these items to you, but basically this property was already separated by the MDC as part of the Granby 5 separation area. So these people have both a sewer lateral and a drain lateral to a dedicated sewer and drain. and they're still experiencing backyard flooding. So the takeaway from here is that even when the MDC does sewer separation, it's not going to address this railroad flooding problem. So the city has been working with Freeman Engineers and the DOT to come up with a solution.
You need a question?
Yeah, Commissioner Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this particular property in the flood zone also?
It's not in the flood zone for the Park River, no.
Thank you.
Good enough.
Thank you.
Somebody else at their hand? Thank you. Please, Emily.
Okay, I'll continue. All right, and then here again is that famous picture from the news. I did want to highlight that 81 Granby Street in yellow is close to this picture of the flooding. This intersection is a known problem near Marcus Garvey Park, Granby Street and Cornwall Street. And I think people kind of regularly go out and document flooding. The road floods, so there's a lot of challenges here. The picture on the left is looking down Cornwall towards Marcus Garvey Park, and the picture on the right is looking down Granby Street with the Marcus Garvey Park on the left. And now we're going to talk about flooding related to the Granby Street conduit. So the Granby Street conduit is a 90 to 108 inch drain pipe owned by the city of Hartford. Historically, two unnamed streams, you kind of see it in the middle going in. There's two unnamed streams going underground. So those were piped to allow for development in the area. The map on the left in yellow shows the location of this drain. And on the right, the downstream, there's no, when the water's piped, there's no FEMA floodplain directly next to it, so it's sort of the blank space on the right. Upstream of the Granby Street conduit, there's the floodway in Bloomfield, and downstream is the North Branch of the Park River. We did a site visit of the outfall from the Granby Street conduit, so the 108-inch pipe discharges behind Weaver High School, behind the multi-use track. So during the time of the inspection, the 108 was clear. We didn't see debris, and it's in pretty good condition, a little deterioration on the wall, but it's still functioning. The issue is that the trapezoidal channel, this concrete channel where the outfall discharges to, had significant sediment buildup. There was trees up to 30 feet, bushes, debris, and so this is impacting the functioning of the system. So this is a maintenance item that it needs maintenance now, and then there'll need to be long-term maintenance to prevent this issue. Leaving the trapezoidal channel is down in the middle, that railroad culvert. The water all has to squeeze down through there. So this is another place where we're going to recommend an evaluation of increasing the size of the culvert to improve flooding conditions. At the upstream end of the Granby Street conduit, we did CCTV, and during that we found that there was large trees within the pipe. So we had a recommendation, and the city did go remove trees within the pipe, and I believe that they're also planning to do an inlet structure to prevent the trees from getting in there. But hopefully just the rule they've already done will reduce the flooding, because the photo shows there's been a lot of flooding at this intersection. So we're attributing this primarily to a maintenance issue. And again, people are out taking photos. This is the same intersection showing that they're regularly having street flooding. And then the last category we're going to talk about upland flooding. So upland flooding reports are on Cornwall Street, Lime Street, Morningside Street, Palm Street. And as the MDC is going to do sewer separation throughout the area, this will help improve conditions of the street flooding. The new storm drains will be designed to a 10-year storm, which is the DOT standard. Each property will receive a new storm lateral primarily for sump pump connections. So this will allow for properties to eliminate the situation of having any sewage in their basements. It will not fully address flooding, though. The designs do not include collecting all yard drains, and the system will still require regular catch basin cleaning and street sweeping. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Nicole to talk about the Riverwalk.
Thank you, Emily. My name's Nicole Durallo. I'm going to talk about the field investigation findings as we walked along the North Branch of the Park River. As a summary, we walked the North Branch of the Park River between August of last year and early October. We identified a lot of erosion, bank collapses, sedimentation, tree dams, and there's a whole collection of photos included in the handouts that you have. We also did a drone flyover, also around this time last year, September, to take a bird's eye view and identify the tree and debris dams that we could see with the drone. And then lastly, we went out and did sediment sampling in November and collected 22 samples. Just a reminder, the project area, we started at the Park River Conduit near Farmington Avenue, and we walked up to the University of Hartford Bridge. So what we're looking at here is the Park River Conduit entrance, and you can see that there are trees built up, and there's some significant aquatic vegetation growing at the bottom. Of the river length that we walked, this location had the most significant sediment depth. The debris at the dam that we identified on the first site walk was dated August 23rd. We did alert the city. The city was able to go out there and have a contractor clean it early November. We went back out this year in May just to see what had collected since then, and that's the picture in the lower right. One of the most significant findings we had was all throughout the river. We found lots and lots of tree dams and down trees. When the trees fall over, they tend to collect trash, and they impede the flow of the river. So north of Albany Avenue had the most tree dams, but it's also the area that still has the most tree canopy. Another issue was undercut banks. So basically the trees on the banks can help stabilize the soil, but if the velocities in the river get too high, it will scour them out. And eventually, once that soil's gone, the trees start to lean, they've got nothing to hold on to, and they will fall into the river and can mobilize downstream. This can create the dams. And also as a result of scouring, we have near vertical banks. It cuts the river off from the floodplains, and when that happens, the flows move through quicker, you get more scour, you have more chances of flooding and also of erosion. Emily might have had this picture up before, the backyard of 150 Scarborough Street. It's just an example of structures being built within the floodplain. There are a lot of structures that we found within the floodplain, so we can expect that to flood when we get significant storms. There isn't much forested buffer here, as you can see. It goes right from the river up to people's lawns, grass right up to the banks, and that can cause what you see here in this picture. There's not any other area for it to go. After we walked the entire length of the river, one of the things we had looked for was sedimentation, where it was building up, and we developed a plan to go back out and collect sediment samples from these locations. We collected 23, and we tested them for both geotechnical and environmental components. The depths range from 4 to 18 inches. There is a handout in the packet that you have. The highest accumulation, as I noted earlier, was near the Park River Conduit, and there's some in other localized areas. So the recommendations we have for the city after doing the river walk was to do some further study. Complete a bathymetry survey, which is going out and getting topographic information on the river so we would know the river depths, the banks, the slopes coming into it, and we would use that information to create a model of the river with a program called HECRAS. That would provide us with the opportunity to do more model runs and evaluate different alternatives and see what the outcomes are and be able to predict some of the flooding. Another recommendation was to install more stream gauges. Right now, there is a USGS stream gauge at the bridge at the Albany Avenue crossing. That's the only one. We were checking this just to make sure before we planned our field events how high the river was and whether it was safe to go out, but we found that it wasn't representative of the whole length of the river. It was just more at that point. So one of the things to gather more information would be putting in more of these stream gauges. And then installing water cast sensors, what that would be, we do it at a couple locations. There's a program that the district is using to help predict how a response to storms in their combined sewer systems, and we could tie this into it and also try to predict what will happen with the river at these various locations depending on the weather coming, and send out alerts if somebody could go out and check these locations to make, in advance of storms, to make sure that they aren't blocked with the trees like we saw in some of the earlier photos. And then the other thing is regular maintenance, to remove the trees and the debris dams at a regular interval, particularly at the entrance, because in order for the water to move out of the area, it does have to get through there. And then remove the leaning trees on the banks, some of the ones in the photos that you had seen, the ones that are going to make it into the river at some point on their own. If they were to remove them now, they could control that and not have them fall into the stream and mobilize downstream and create a dam. And then to clean all existing pipes, culverts, and channels, and make sure that's done on a regular basis. As Emily showed with the Park River conduit outfall, there were significant vegetation and sedimentation in the channels, and there were some restrictions getting into some of the culverts. As for the river, some of the recommendations we're making are to grade back the banks to restore some near dynamic equilibrium, basically try to get the river to return to natural conditions so that the water could move as intended. Widening the banks and dredging in select locations. This would help to create more storage and reduce erosion. Reinforce the sections that are actively eroding with either root wads or riprap, so naturalized or with stone, depending on what the conditions there allow. Increasing the natural floodplain storage by excavating out some basins that would allow the water to have a place to overflow to until the river comes back down after a storm. Increasing woodland floodplains by removing the parking lots. Emily mentioned DCIA, the directly connected impervious areas. That's part of the MS4. Taking parking lots out would help reduce that. Another idea is to construct berms around flood-prone properties. And the example we're using here is the University High School of Science and Engineering on Mark Twain Drive. And in addition, provide some education and planning. Educate property owners on floodplains and forested buffers, particularly in areas like Scarborough Street. Do not allow further development in the floodplain. Some of the earlier photos, we compared the aerials from, was it 1940s? 1930s to now, and you could see what's been built in the floodplain, and those properties are obviously impacted when it rains and the flood comes up. And the last thing is to consider relocating some of the housing out of floodplain via land purchases, such as on Woodland Drive, which would be another MS4 benefit, and is something some other communities in Connecticut have actually done.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Chairman? Excuse me.
Yes, you may, Commissioner Salami.
Oh, thank you. Before we move on past it, so in the walk that you did and the photos that you took on the walk, you don't happen to have a photo of the combined sewer overflow at near Albany Avenue, do you?
I do not have that in this presentation. We probably do have it somewhere if you're interested in seeing it.
Yeah, I'm just curious, and to go back to what Chairman Curry asked earlier. So in that little paragraph that you pointed to, or that the chairman pointed to, it basically says that the MDC will have to eliminate combined sewer overflows. But my question is, my understanding is that those combined sewer overflows don't work every day. As a matter of fact, that there's only a few times during the year where we actually use those. So the contribution to the Park River, to the quantity in the Park River from the MDC is not as significant as what comes in off of roadways and so forth around here. And of course, Albany Avenue is Route 44, state of Connecticut's highway. And there aren't any outfalls from that. There's no storm sewers in Route 44 that go into the North Branch. or are there? That's my question is, what are the contributions into the North Branch from the city of Hartford's town line to where to where it enters the conduit? I mean, beside how many combined sewer overflows are there from the MDC, and what are the other contributions to the river itself?
Hi, Commissioner Salemi, this is Joe LaLiberte. There's 4 combined sewer overflows that go to the river. We did in the past, probably, I don't know, it's got to be 5, 6, 7 years ago, we did do a study related to, very similar to what you're asking, of what the contributions were to the river, what the sources of bacteria were, what was the MDC's discharge, and your memory is correct that the flow from the outfalls based on a bacterial level and a flow level is small compared to the rest of the drainage area for the North Branch of the Park River, and I believe that's what you are getting at. We just don't 5 years ago.
Well, I understand, but it's the same sort of thought that Commissioner Curry had. Okay, the MDC is participating in this because we do have the combined sewer overflows and we do make use of it. But what you're describing not what you're describing, Joe, but what's being described in this presentation is basically, how the river could function better. It seems like there's a lot of maintenance functions that could be performed that would really make a difference. And then I know we didn't look at the South Branch, but because the South Branch has a hardened structure, it's a trapezoidal thing too, I think. It doesn't have the problems with backups. It doesn't have trees blocking. It doesn't require the kind of maintenance. So I appreciate the photographs and the comments on the maintenance items with the river. And I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that the MDC does not contribute a major portion of the flooding to this river. If that's correct, and I think it is, Joe. I think you said that it is. So.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes,
Scott.
Scott Jolson, CEO. I just want to add to that, just to clarify the important part of our outfalls to this river as it exists. We did present a short time ago, a year ago, on developments that are outfalls directly to the North Branch of the Park River, Westbrook Village. And we did do a presentation. And as part of this preparation, we did show that the outfall that we're relying on, independent of how much water we discharge to the river, the problem we're having is our outfalls are in the mud of the river. So the water that we're trying to exit into the river through a CSO can't get out. And it's basically backing up into the community. So that's the most important part of the condition of the river as it is and how it impacts our rivers. Your Commissioner is absolutely right, with minimal in terms of quantity of water, but the impact to the community, because our outfalls can't operate correctly, is that that pressure that water just can't get out of our outfalls. And Westbrook Village was an example, and we did a presentation on that about a year ago. So,
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Mandyck, I just had, as we were talking about some properties and your recommendations, I just have a few questions. On Woodland Drive, is the majority of the flooding occurring in the southwest development areas, or is it all of the housing developments along Woodland Drive?
I don't know if we have a picture of it, but I think, so Woodland Drive is...
It comes down and then more of it is backed up toward the river. I just didn't know if it was the entire way, all the way to the Griffin line, or if it was the entire development or a portion of it.
I think it's portions of the development fall within, so I think it's like a cul-de-sac, and the end near the cul-de-sac is the closest to the river, and those properties along there are more impacted because those are within the floodplain.
And then if I could, Mr. Chair, just a few more. I also noticed that Eversource has a transmission line station, something or other, along its right near the river, did you study was there any flooding that occurred over in that area?
We did not. I'm not aware of the Eversource facility.
Okay. And then if you had to look at either Granby Street or Woodland, the flooding, is there one that's worse than the other right now? Would you say there's one that's more of a high priority, or?
If we're looking at Granby Street, we've got flooding in the road on the downstream end where that Marcus Garvey Park is. And obviously that's what made the national news, and that's caused some problems there because the water can't get out. Part of that is that railroad swale kind of keeping things in. Another part is what Scott just mentioned, and that the elevations of the river at the outfall point are high, which can cause the water to start backing up in the pipes. I think that would probably be the priority. That might be something that we work on under the sewer separation portion.
And last question that I had, Mr. Chair, if I could, I would assume that there are no punch throughs for the rail to get to the other side, to get over. Do we have any drains that go from east to west through the freight rail system there on the Griffin line?
The only one that we're aware of is the one we had the photo of, where it was just the really small, limited opening. That is something we're looking at because we can't really change the top elevation of the rail. It's set for it to operate, so we'd have to work within the confines of that existing structure there and hopefully widen it so that we weren't impacting the height of that railroad.
And that one's near Weaver High School? Is that where you said
It's
that one?
downstream, so do we have let me see, I might have to do a lot of clicking here. That's not there. So there's the railroad in the middle at the bottom. So that's a pretty small opening, but we can't change the elevation of the top of the rail. So this facility is downstream of. There's the Weaver High School playing fields. It kind of snakes through there. So one end of the culvert is the outfall pipe from the Granby area, and the other, the exit for it, is the railroad culvert there. I'm not aware of any other punch throughs on there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Further, Joe, did you want to comment on something in that?
Well, I was just going to add that there's two different reasons for flooding, and I can't really answer your question of prioritizing them or not, which is also what you were getting at, but there's some flooding that is occurring that's along the river where it's within the floodplain, and potentially it would be better if the river didn't have these blockages, but it still would occur. So in those cases, in some of those cases, no matter what you did to the river, it's still going to flood because they're built either adjacent to or within the floodplain. But then there's areas like Granby Street is not within the floodplain, which was a question that Commissioner Payne asked earlier. That is more of what Mr. Jellison was getting at, of the water can't get out. The outfalls, and what Commissioner Salemi was saying, those outfalls are completely submerged when that river is flooded. So it's two different things. So then one of them you could solve, one of them you can't solve by just making things better. You'd have to potentially, demolish the buildings and relocate them, which is something that other communities have done. I don't know if that's something that Hartford would be interested in doing or not, but other communities have done that.
Thank you, Joe. Further questions, commissioners? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, is Commissioner Bush on the line?
Yes, say your name again, I'm sorry. Commissioner Bush. Commissioner
Bush?
Could you speak up?
Yes, thank you. I'll do my best.
Very good.
Just to clarify, we've seen a lot of issues, a lot of areas of flooding and a lot of concerns. What areas specifically are the responsibility of the MDC, and what method of payment and where would the source of funds come to take care of whatever part of this would be the responsibility of the MDC?
If I may, Scott Jellison.
Please.
So we've got a lot of presentation to give, and that's exactly our point, Commissioner. Everything you saw so far is associated with the responsibility of the City of Hartford and the Greater Hartford Flood Commission. That's the point. The report was divided into two pieces. there's been lots of discussion over the years that this flooding was really being caused by the MDC sewer system wasn't big enough. And this report is meant to show that this flooding is coming from these areas, and mainly because these areas are built within the floodplain. The next part of this presentation will talk about, as we say, the upland, the areas within the streets, and the localized flooding in those streets. So I think we got to get to the rest of the presentation so we can answer that question. But it's really important to understand what we're trying to say here in this study. We have localized flooding that's been occurring for years because housing and developments occurred within the floodplain. There's nothing the MDC can do to fix it, period. Here's the things that can be done by the City of Hartford and the Greater Hartford Flood Commission to make it better. But as I mentioned in Westbrook Village, the other thing that causes flooding associated to your question, Mr. Bush, from the MDC is our sewer overflows, and now the potential for new storm pipes that need to go to this river in this condition. Our concern is it will back up into the city. Fresh storm, clean storm water. So it's complicated, but not. Everything you've seen to date is associated with flooding for building in the floodplain and for lack of maintenance in the river and or the areas surrounding the river. The next number of slides will be to talk about what MDC needs to do when it comes to the sewer separation projects, and the reason why we're so concerned about connecting $170 million worth of work to this channel of water body, this Greater Hartford Flood Commission channel, which is an asset to the flood control system in Hartford. We are afraid to connect to it because of what is happening on Westbrook Village. Westbrook Village is identical to what we're concerned about. Our outfall pipes are already too far lower in an elevation because the river's too high and the mud's too high, and our water can't get out of our system. We don't want to build a brand new system and then connect to this infrastructure and have the same problem that we're having at Westbrook Village. But if you want to continue and we can get to the engineering piece of it for the MDC.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it.
No
That
problem.
answer. Thank you very much.
I believe we do have a question.
Yeah, Commissioner Gale.
Commissioner Gale.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, thank you.
Just to follow up on that concept of moving the houses out of the floodplain. Not that this is realistic, but what would happen if you moved the railroad out of the floodplain on the other side?
That I don't know.
So that hasn't been studied.
That has not been studied.
And is there any concept of just putting more culverts or conduits through the railroad berm to get the water to the other side?
I'm not sure in every location that would help because it has to do with the elevation of the water in the river rising during storms and bigger storm events. So that'll start to back up into the floodplains. And if those culverts are within the floodplains, then they're impacted by that as well.
Last question, if I may.
Please.
This whole concept of 100-year floods, 500-year floods, does that need to be revisited given the storms that we've seen recently? And
So we're using those here. They're FEMA floods that we have some information on. But we did have an agreement with the city on what we would design to in the different storm conditions that we would look at.
Scott Jolson,
Go
if I
right
could just answer the question the Commissioner asked. Commissioner, the City of Hartford staff and DOT were looking at a possible channel to get water from the east side of the railroad behind the homes to the river. I don't know where they are with that process, that project. But they were looking at putting some form of a pipe that would help alleviate that water behind those homes.
thank you.
Thank you. We do have a time crunch. because there's another meeting following ours. I'm not trying to cut anybody's discussion or questions off, but we do have another large part of the presentation. So unless it's an urgent question, can we move on without objection? Thank you. I don't know who's actually going to speak at this point.
Maybe we'll skip this then. This is just about monitoring and what we can look at in the future. So we'll get into the sewer separation. I'll turn it back over to Emily.
Thank you, Nicole. All right, to get into the MDC portion, so in the city of Hartford, there's currently a combined sewer. So this is a kind of a standard graphic showing that currently both the sewer and the storm go to a single pipe, but in the future, we're looking to have a separate sanitary sewer and a separate storm drain, and we'll be putting a lateral of each to each home. So this will let the sewage get to the wastewater treatment plant and let the storm drainage get to the waterway, which in this case is the north branch of the Park River. We do want to, now we've said it several times now, but this will not address the flooding between the railroad tracks and the houses. It would not affect the flooding along the river, but it will improve conditions upland and serve the goal of the MDC of getting the sewage out of the water body and of people's homes. So here, the existing outfalls, so there's the 108-inch Granby Street conduit that outfalls storm drainage to the river, and the other two pipes are the N2 and N4 overflow pipes, which we were just talking about. In the future, when the separation is complete, those will be dedicated storm drains. We're laying out sewer separation across the Granby Street area, and in addition to those three existing outfalls, we're finding that we'll need an 84-inch outfall near Tower Ave at Weaver High School, a 72-inch outfall between 227 and 233 Granby Street. This was previously designed and permitted as Granby 1, and a new outfall from the area of 45 Granby Street through the Westbrook Village easement to the river, or an alternate, it could be a pump station could be put at 45 Granby Street in a force main to either pump the water to the river or pump the water downstream to the Park River conduit. So first, this Granby Street conduit, 108-inch pipe, we've talked about it during our investigations. We found that there was issues with trees blocking. We found that the trapezoidal channel at the outfall needed maintenance and have made recommendations. The MDC's long-term control plan anticipated that the new storm drains in the upper portion of the Granby separation would be connected to the 108-inch pipe. However, the MDC is concerned about connecting to this pipe because of the existing flooding issues, the existing maintenance issues. So at this time, we're proceeding with that 84-inch pipe, the new outfall near Weaver High School, and that would go through, we'll have a slide. But so at this time, we're planning it for a new outfall, but that was not anticipated in the long-term control plan, so it could cause delays for the sewer separation. Here's the layout of that potential new northern outfall. Granby 7, 8, 9, and 10 are just the names we use for the northern separation areas, and we've sized that as an 84-inch outfall pipe. So it would go through the Weaver High driveway, it would go under the railroad, over the interceptor, and through the U-Hart parking lot to the river. We are concerned about, we've talked a lot of issues here, so we have considered the option of doing a stormwater pumping station, which would bring the flow away from the north branch of the Park River. However, to get down to the Park River conduit that has capacity, it would be a 1.6-mile force main. So this would be a very expensive project for both the pump station and the force main. We just had the few slides on the separation, and now just the next steps of finalizing the report next week, and then proceeding with super separation designs based on the finalized outfall locations. That's my last slide.
Thank you. And just to clarify, to my understanding, there is no action that we need to take. We only need to accept the report as given. Unless I missed something, that's it on this part. And we do want to get to the second, next item, not second, number 5, on Durham Street.
Yeah, if I could just say one thing, which is important, we're not asking for any action.
Sorry.
But I just want to, if you, Emily, go back to the slide that shows the 84-inch.
This one?
Is that show the 84-inch?
Highlighted in yellow.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the new 84.
Oh, sorry. There you go. There's the 84-inch.
Yeah, but you had it up with the 108-inch on the same slide. There's a couple before that. Right there.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so this is the important part. So we've talked about the reasons why we're doing this study. We're trying to prove that whatever MDC does in this area will not solve flooding in this area, period. There's a lot of, misperceptions about MDC and what's causing the flooding, not causing flooding. This report shows that the flooding that's occurring is not being caused by the MDC. Our position at the MDC is, our portion of this report is, we've got to decide, what do? Do we spend the money for 84-inch pipe and pump stations, $150 million, or do we utilize the existing yellow infrastructure that's owned by the city of Hartford, but we can't use it the way it is because we're going to have brand new pipe connected to that yellow pipe, and the water's it's going to be all fresh storm water, and it's going to back up into people's homes. We just spent $170 million in North Hartford, and storm water is going to be backing up into people's homes because of the condition of the river. So our position is we can't trust that that's going to get done. And what we've been working with was the city of Hartford, with the Greater Hartford Flood Commission. I just met with Bloomfield last night. We've the recommendation of the chairman that we reach out to the Greater Hartford Flood Commission towns and talk to them to see if there's first educate everybody to make them understand how important this North Branch of the Park River is, not just to Hartford, but is to Bloomfield, Newington, Weathersfield, Windsor, West Hartford. I'm missing somebody. Anyways, there's 5 towns, including Hartford, that this is really important to them. It affects them. That's the reason why Newington and Bloomfield have a seat on the commission, and West Hartford have a seat on the Greater Hartford Commission. We're at the point of we should be designing our projects right now, starting in April, but we're not, because we don't know where to connect to. So what we're hopeful is we presented to the Greater Hartford Flood Commission in July 18th, and we presented to the city of Hartford on the 25th. We're presenting tonight. I know that the town of Bloomfield is on the phone. I know West Hartford's on the phone. I think Newington's on the phone. This is really important decision that we have to make as to what happens to the condition of this river. If it's dredged, we don't even know the number, but assume it's 50 million. And it could be less, it could be more, but let's assume it's 50 million versus 150 million for the MDC to go on its own to discharge it somewhere else. Whatever happens, MDC is going to discharge more stormwater to this river. And if the river's not dredged, you're going to see surcharging downstream Scarborough Street. You're going to see more flooding. So dredging the river, as Emily said, Joe said, you possibly lower the elevation of the hydraulic grade of the water by 2 feet. You just created 2 feet of space for more water to come into this river. So that's our dilemma right now, is what do we do? We can't start designing these projects until we make a decision. So we're gonna need a decision from the City of Hartford, the Greater Hartford Flood Commission, hopefully the towns associated with the Greater Hartford Flood Commission recognize the importance of this because it impacts them, it impacts their development. They're responsible to the Greater Hartford Flood Commission for any impacts they make to the watercourse to the North Branch of Park River. They have to get a permit through the Greater Hartford Flood Commission. So it's a complicated issue, but it's a really important one. And, we talk about 50 million versus 150 million. 50 million, my friend Henry Jenga said, he was at the Flood Commission meeting. I love Henry. And $150 million, the City of Hartford's ad valorem is 25% of the ad valorem. So 25% of 150 is $40 million bucks. So Hartford either pays $40 million or $50 million. And Hartford has partners because there's members that are outlined in the Greater Hartford Flood Commission. We don't want to spend $150 million. That's ridiculous when you can spend $50 million. But you've got to have a plan that this will be maintained for the future, because what's happening right now on Westbrook Village is the water can't get out. And that's what surcharged in part. Somebody asked the question, what happened? What was part of our flooding in the Granby area? Well, guess what? The water came, it couldn't get out of our overflow pipe, and it backed up into the street. Because if you look at the elevation, the water seeks its own level. The elevation of Granby Street to the elevation of the river is almost identical, especially when the river's high. So you've got to have a way to get the water out of the city. And this is a big decision. We'd have to have a referendum to spend $150 million. We could only spend up to $25 million plus or minus every year without a referendum. But if we don't and we can't do this project, EPA in the state of Connecticut will come in and say, here's a consent order, do it. We don't want that either. So we've been working closely with James and the city of Hartford and trying to come to some conclusion here. We got a little ways to go. Joe mentioned the final report's coming out, but there's going to be a big decision to make in a very short time frame. And we just wanted to educate everybody as to the topic and the importance of our towns, Newington, West Hartford, Bloomfield, and Windsor and Weathersfield.
Recognizing Commissioner Taylor.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would think that we have just dealt with this, perhaps not completely, and I think that this probably is an item that would be appropriate to have back on our agenda again. I just think that there are other aspects or components of this that we need to discuss and look at very carefully. One of the things that I'm concerned about is when the MDC came into being and took over some of the responsibilities of the city of Hartford, and there was a transfer of assets and what have you. I just want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of how that works out with regards to the North Branch of the Park River. And I say that because this is a matter that the MDC took a very careful look at maybe 10 years ago. And we were really heavily involved, and I would call it a hot pursuit. And for some reason, we backed off of it. And I'm not quite sure why. And I would like to, at least for us to take a look at that. But also, I think, continue to discuss this issue, because I just think that there's a lot there. And it's not only just the technical issues, but I think you get into some very dicey and touchy political and social issues. When, for example, when you talk about buying residences and tearing down the homes and moving people out, that's an interesting and rational approach in the abstract. But when you start talking about actually doing it, you open up a hornet's nest. So I would just suggest that, or I would like for us to add this item, have this item back on the agenda for further discussion.
Well, we'll certainly follow up, Commissioner Taylor. Thank you. We have one question on the phone lines from Commissioner Stuber. Commissioner
Yes, thank
Stuber?
you. I have a question for the consultant that I'd like to just kind of clarify what the study is and is not kind of concluding here. So through you, Mr. Chairman, to them, is it your position and finding and conclusion that if all of the recommendations you've made for dredging, et cetera, of the North Branch of the Park River were followed through on, that there would no longer be any flooding in the Granby and Blue Hills area?
Joe Liberty with CDM Smith. It would certainly benefit it, but it depends on exactly where you're referring to. If it's located within the floodplain, it will make it better, potentially. You know, if we lower the water level by 2 feet, it would reduce the amount of times the area would flood, the frequency, and then it would reduce, how impactful the flooding was. But in the upland areas, if you actually were able to get the flow out, you should be able to solve the flooding altogether. So it really depends on the specific place you're referring to.
Okay, thank you. So you're saying that the capacity of the North Branch of the Park River is a contributing factor, but not the sole cause of flooding that folks are seeing in Granby and Blue Hills neighborhoods?
It's a large factor. There was one slide that Emily had talked about that had upland flooding that was, say, upstream of Granby area, where there was some flooding complaints. That wouldn't be impacted by the North Branch of the Park River, but the majority of the slides that you saw were, related to flooding around the North Branch of the Park River and just immediate upstream of it.
Okay, thank you. So I just think it's important that we be clear for members of the community that may be listening to the presentation and some of the summaries that have been given of its findings, that what we are and we aren't sort of saying here. And so even if every recommendation that's made here we're followed through on, we're not to conclude from that, or folks should not conclude from that would address all the flooding that we've seen in the area. I just think I think it's important to be very clear about that in terms of expectations. So one related question for you then. Is it your conclusion that absent the capacity issues of or let me put it this way, is it your conclusion, or have you studied the following question, that absent the capacity issues of the North Branch of the Park River, is it your finding that the capacity of the MDC system in the area is otherwise adequate to prevent all future flooding?
There's areas that have already been separated that are still flooding for the reason that they can't get out because of the North Branch of the Park River. But there's there's two parts to the study. One is the North Branch Park River, which is the report that we'll be sending out next week as draft. But then separately, there's areas within this Granby Street area that we call it North Branch Park River area that needs drainage. We need to separate the streets, and that would be done over a period of likely decades. So there's, for those couple decades, that the drainage would be improved. It would include the private connections to the houses so that the basements wouldn't back up. It includes drain on streets that don't currently have them.
Okay, so if the river were dredged and if all the sewer separation is completed, are you saying then that flooding in the area would cease, or would there still be a flooding risk?
In the flood zone.
If everything was functioning properly and maintained properly and the drainage was there should be minimal flooding other than the areas that are located within the 100-year floodplain.
Can we leave that
Okay,
there
thank you.
with last question?
Yeah,
Mr.
just,
Payne?
I'll make it real quick, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner Payne here. You said that you did some sampling. I was wondering, out of the 23 sampling, my first question was, did you get any results back? And quickly, if you could give us the results. And then on this study, on the dredging, did you estimate approximately how many yards of material might have to be removed out of it?
I personally don't know either of those off the top of my head, but both of those will be answered in the report coming out next week.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, sir. If, I guess we can move on. At this moment, we have number 6. Am I right? Number 5, Durham. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah,
else
Nick
about
Solon is
him?
going to give an update.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Just a positive
good.
update on one of our projects in the North Hartford area. Go ahead, Nick.
Thanks, Nick.
Sure. We'll keep it moving for you here. Thank you, Commissioners, members of DPW. We see up on the screen before you and in front of you is a one-page summary of the first completed project as part of the integrated plan, North Hartford Sewer Improvement Project, which is the Durham Street Sewer Separation. Obviously, there's more extensive details, but we wanted to put together something that's kind of easy to digest summary out there to highlight the progress of the work that you all approved just about a year ago. It talks about both the sewer work and the private property that's work supporting it that previously was not allowed by our regulators, which we want to make sure that the public and our customers know. One-page summary can really in no way encompass all the work that went into getting this project done as fast as it was done by our engineering and construction staff and their contractors, utility services, operations, our communications and outreach, support from finance, procurement, just to get this done. So that's not even everyone, but I thought I just should mention it. I thought this would be a good start as a format to help tell this story and really serve as a template for other projects as they become completed throughout this year, next year, and through the consent order. We want to highlight things. We can make changes to this, add things, delete things, but I think it's a good start. We wanted to highlight things like the cost of the project, 38% of Hartford resident workforce, and other key highlights like some of the specific private property improvements. So quick. In addition, we put together some photos that show kind of the active construction. These are all on Durham Street from last, I want to say September, October, just to show you how invasive the work is and how much is going on in that neighborhood. It's kind of contrast, sort of like the before picture, and contrast it with the restoration that's taken place since, we'll call it the after, the kind of the extensive restoration of the streets, the sidewalks, the lawns, people's private property. You can see the work that everybody did there. Another one right there. So in addition to our traditional outreach, we're currently working with the marketing division of WFSB Channel 3, putting together kind of a multimedia campaign to highlight both the progress of the integrated plan and the North Hartford Sewer Improvement Project since we started last year. Part of what we just showed you here, Durham Street, the milestone of the completion, will be part of the campaign. But over a year ago or so, we've produced multiple videos about this project, one of which we'll play in a minute, ranging from sewer backup prevention, construction of the separation projects, lining projects, our outreach office is the one we're going to show, and just basics about the integrated plan. The team is going to use the footage that we've produced over the past year and a half at WFSB and integrate it with some new footage that they will shoot and produce, will be ultimately distributed through their sort of vast reach that they have beyond us, including but not limited to their broadcast, their website, their ability to place a story, and their social media. And we've actually set it up so they can have these stories target the zip codes and the MDC service areas, so we know our customers are the ones seeing it. Additionally, once it's done, the MDC staff can take any content produced by them and reuse it however we want to keep telling this story. We're targeting about mid-September we'll have something, but we will get something out to all the commissioners well ahead of time so you know when it's going to run. Briefly, we're going to show one of the videos that we put out this summer. For those of you who were not there and didn't get a chance to see it, was when we had the opening of the outreach office in, I believe, mid-May. The footage from this video will be included as part of it.
We want to invest in this community. So by us having an office within this community that we're going to disrupt for 10 years, we understand your pain. And we get the fact that we're here to help you and make changes, whatever we need to make. We initiated a change in the Clean Water Project in this area back in April of 2023.
What they did was they promised $170 million in projects in 4 or 5 designated areas, including here in North Hartford.
The whole plan of the Clean Water Project that we're now executing is to just continue to spend $50 million a year, every year, just to improve our system.
We did have some pretty aggressive deadlines. The MDC has met them all.
We really needed an outreach office. And we said, we're with you.
Let me be clear about one thing. North Hartford never asked for more than anybody else. But we don't want any less than anybody else.
Us having this place in North Hartford, in the 5th District, you now can just walk in and talk to a human. It's very meaningful for us to be able to have that, especially for something that impacts somebody's life.
Opening this office in the neighborhood, getting that information out to the neighbors is the most important thing to making this program work.
The site for the first time. I saw it. It's a true beacon of hope.
We are moving. Northeast State Board is calling the move.
This is a great first step, but we're going to be here to verify and confirm. I'm really proud to be a part of it.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please. Put a period on it.
We cannot try to encompass how much work has gone in from our staff. I just want to reiterate what Nikki said. We self-imposed a 30%. We've never done this before. Deep's never allowed it. We self-imposed a 30% requirement of hiring Hartford residents, and as this says, we averaged 38. More importantly, this project was the first project that we started, but as Speaker Ritter said, and we've had a number of people say to us, we want you to start digging in July of 2023. That was the goal, right? We're going to give you all this money. We started in April, just negotiating with Deep. We started in April, just negotiating with Deep, and we were digging in July. And the only way we could do that was to have all of MDC staff and our contractors help us. And just a little statistic, we use work orders for our staff to do work in the field. So our operational staff, they get a work order just like Sears repairman would give you a work order, right? And that's every work order is something to do. 2022 and early 2023 was roughly 1,000 work orders for operations to go out there and fix things or do things. In 2023 to 24, we went to 3,200, 2,400 more work orders because MDC was having to do all of this work up in North Hartford. That says a lot to, there's so much work that was done by our staff. It's amazing. And I just thank all of them for the hard work they did. It would have never gotten done. And this project is 1.5 years ahead of schedule than what we agreed to with Deep in April, May, and June. So our schedule for this project is 1.5 years ahead of schedule. So congratulations to our staff. They did a great job. Thank you.
Yeah, we do have to take 2 items that are action items before we lose a quorum. So if we can move quickly along to item number 6 and then item number 7. We need a motion.
Move adoption.
Thank you, sir.
Second.
Second, thank you. We need for presentation from staff.
No question.
Hearing none, seeing none, we'll call for a vote on item number 6. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Number 6 passes. Number 7.
Move adoption.
Second.
Thank you. And again, I don't know that staff is going to say anything at this point. Is it Mr. Curley?
Yes, thank you.
I'll give you a chance, Mr. Curley.
On 7, it's just received a request from the town
Windsor to amend the original resolution that was approved on March 4th so that they could add another electrical line across the easement.
Thank you. Thank you. All in favor of moving this forward? Thank you. Any opposition? Hearing none. Any vote on the phone? Hearing none. We'll call that pass. That's item number 7. On item number 8 is an opportunity for general public comments. I don't know that we have any members of the public. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you, Judy. Sorry.
I have to say, I expected to make these comments at the beginning of the meeting, but I heard you say, I don't hear any, so we'll move on. Right as I was at the door, I missed by 10 seconds.
I'm sorry.
That's okay, it wasn't your fault. It was the traffic. My comments will be changed a little bit. And mostly my concern has been that all these projects being considered and studied and implemented, that they be forward-looking. We only have to look at the flooding that happened along the coast to know that things are changing and we need to adapt. And my fear is that we create something to whatever standard anybody sets now, and in 10, 20 years, it's no longer usable. It's not feasible anymore because we didn't anticipate the future. I also wanted to refer to a front page article in Sunday's Current. Climate change focus moves to inland towns. And just a few excerpts. Scientists at the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation, or CIRCA, are examining how more sudden intense rains are overwhelming decades-old drains. Initially, CIRCA assessments, part of its Resilience Connecticut program, focused on New Haven and Fairfield counties. But now those efforts have moved beyond the coast to inland towns and cities and are now including Hartford. They're now poised to expand deeper into the Hartford area, which includes the 38 towns and cities that are part of the Capital Region Council of Governments. They've identified about 63 areas in the region that could benefit from infrastructure improvements responding to climate change. CIRCA is likely to be working on a project in East Hartford to address flooding in an underpass on Main Street. In addition, another project in Berlin, Newington, and possibly New Britain could address flooding tied to Piper and Webster Brooks. So I guess part of my wish is that the MDC could work more collaboratively with programs like CIRC. And I don't know if the MDC has been involved with them up to this point with any projects underway or what they are aware of in terms of what CIRC is doing. And I guess, let's see, the last thing I might say as a result to the video of what's being planned with Channel 3, and not to forget that the real force behind these projects were the residents and business people. If they had not been up in arms and contacted people like EPA, this still wouldn't have happened. The money wouldn't have been there. I mean, they worked tirelessly to make this come about. So I think it's important to recognize them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, as usual, Judy. We appreciate your comments, thoughts. If there are any suggestions from commissioners for agenda items, yes, Commissioner
Not an
Curry.
agenda item. Scott had identified 3 towns that he believed was online or on the phone with us tonight. I'm wondering, are there any representatives from any of our member towns here tonight?
East Hartford was here. I don't know that.
Starford is here.
Okay, thank you. I can't see that far.
I know the feeling. Thank you. If I miss somebody's suggestion, pass it on, and I'll be happy to carry the water, so to speak. And with that, and I apologize to Commissioner Adel, Chairman of the Water Bureau, who is sitting outside waiting to run the next meeting.
You're exactly on time. It's 5:30.
Mr. Chairman,
Well, I'll be darned. I knew it.
Hold on.
I got a question.
Oh,
I learned from the best.
Commissioner
I'm
Patel.
sorry, Patel.
Yeah, you need to lower your glasses,
No,
okay?
thank you.
I raised my hand.
I'm sorry.
What I'm saying is, this is a serious issue, and we briefly touched it several months ago about creating flood entity, whatever name you call it, for entire region plus MDC members. And we briefly touched it, not understanding the magnitude of the problem requires a lot of planning, design, management, future years, who should manage how, and it is important that we start more education system and make more and more people aware. And that role, I think we should play right now, because promising people, yes, we will do this, your problem will go away, it is not going to go away. It's a much bigger than anybody here MDC can
goes
handle.
far beyond the Park River.
Right.
And it goes to stormwater management, which is
Sure.
what we have been talking about for several years now.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. My apologies if I missed your hand. Anything else? We're done.
You're late. You're late now.
Now I'm late.
Cost a minute.
Motion to adjourn.
Absolutely adjourned.
Bang that gavel, baby.